Where is the Dobbs published decision from the Supreme Court? Parish orphans and retrogrades, greetings. Today is Thursday, following upon yesterday's further Wednesday release of a rash of Supreme Court decisions. They released these in cohorts, and yesterday was June the 15th. Another release of about 5 case decisions from SCOTUS. Remember, all June, parish orphans, retrogrades, decisions are being released, usually on Mondays and Wednesdays, sometimes on days in between. And in the last week, we have had 3 cohorts, batches, if you will, of released decisions from this second meeting of the Supreme Court jurists of the year, the second of 2. And the Dobbs decision, which is set, we are all being told, to turn the U.S. back to civil war because it will overturn Roe versus Wade, according to a May the 2nd draft opinion leaked by a still as yet unknown leaker. We are awaiting the publication of the actual Dobbs decision. What's stalling it? What is stalling it? What are they going to do? What is the end? What is the purpose? What's the end game of the procrastination by the Supreme Court in this stalling of Alito's opinion? We don't know, and no man can tell you what the end game is from the perspective of those 9 jurists, particularly the 5 jurists on the High Court who, by all measures, are going to overturn Roe versus Wade the minute that this decision is published. Can't tell you that. What I can tell you, especially after yesterday, June the 15th, which had lots of news in this area, is the endgame, the goal, the teleology of the opponents of the release and the publication of Dobbs, as all of us, left and right, expect it to be released. Some form recognizable after the May 2nd draft version. In other words, an overturn of Roe versus Wade. Now, what are they trying to do? Groups such as Ruth Sent Us, Jane's Revenge, who we're going to discuss today, this episode of Rules for Retrogrades, they are trying, of course, to either procrastinate or, final goal, alter the decision of Dobbs versus Jackson to reverse, such that the decision will not, as the draft opinion does, reverse Roe versus Wade. The second big question I'm going to deal with today is, what is AG Merrick Garland doing about the threats and the overt acts of violence being perpetrated by such pro-abortion groups? It is straight up domestic terrorism. I'm going to prove that point to you in today's show. Straight up, textbook, it is the platonic form of the definition of domestic terrorism, what's happening in this shattered country. And it is ostensibly altering the timeline, the chronology of the release of Dobbs. Everyone's talking about it. Who knows what's going on? Everyone on that side of the issue, the pro-Roe side of the issue, the mainstream media, is not talking about it. So that's what we're going to discuss today. A quick reminder before we get into it, June the 21st is the first day of summer, and it is the first day of the Father Elijah Rules for Retrogrades book club. To join this book club, become a patron today at Timothy J. Gordon Patreon. And any level of patron is welcome to join us in our weekly book club meeting. It's a lot of fun. Father Elijah is arguably the best book I've ever read, the most exciting anyway. And it is utterly Catholic. It predicted the Francis pontificate, and it predicted what's going on in the world outside the church during the Francis pontificate. Maybe it's private revelation. We're going to talk about that in the first meeting on June the 21st. After that, it'll be Fridays as we go forward. Become a patron today at patreon.com. Get the hell out of your blue state. Get to a red state. There is no warrant for a conservative or a Christian or a conservative Christian maintaining his citizenship in a blue state in the failed experiment of the United States of America, the 50-state union version anyway, any longer. So get to a red state, go to realestateforlife.org, and they will help you to get to a red state. Good, mostly Catholic, all pro-life people, good cause, will help you to get out of your blue state. You got to do so, folks. Oh my gosh. You got to get out of your blue state before the midterm elections. They'll help you do so. Go to realestateforlife.org today. Like this video. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed to this channel. Click the notification bell so it matters, because there's no point in subscribing if you're not going to be able to get live updates on when we release a new video, about 3 times a week. And if you're so willing, purchase our books. The Case for Patriarchy and STEPH'S book can be purchased from my website at timothyjgordon.com. Ask Your Husband, 2nd edition. That's how you support this show. There's no other shows on the internet that do what we do here. All other shows are, if you're a conservative or a Catholic, then we have something for you. And then if you're a conservative Catholic, then we have extra stuff for you. But all other shows are either conservative or Catholic. This show does all in one. From a distinctly U.S. constitutional, Thomistic, Aristotelian, traditional, friendly point of view. What the hell's going on in our country? People ask this. They ask me this all the time. What's going on in our country? The question demands a response. And my response is always, well, what are your expectations? You guys, if you listen to this program, you know that I'm going to always respond, well, what are your expectations? Do you think this is, of the forms of government, we're a republic, we're not a democracy, no matter how many times they brainwash you to that effect on CNBC or CNN. We are a Republican form of government. And republics are supposed to be small, they're supposed to be univocal, supposed to be Christian, everyone in a republic should be one religion. In our case, it was Christianity. And then they made the country giant, and this doesn't really work. And now we're downstream of 200 years of being a republic in name only, by being so large and diverse ideologically, ethnically. Some of the ethnic diversity works. None of the ideological diversity works. It's too much diversity across the board. And it's simply not a republic. So if you ask me what the hell, Tim, is going on in our country from the perspective of being surprised that the center cannot hold, that the bottom's falling out, then we have another conversation coming. Then it's like, you have to understand, we're a country that forgot its warrant. We forgot our reason for being, at least after the Civil War, if not before. I'd say after the Civil War. But I would say, well, this is a really important discussion, because what you see, kind of like 2 summers ago, if you venture into the streets in certain of our major cities, our biggest cities, is nothing other than domestic violence, which is being rewarded from the Department of Justice, by Merrick Garland, and by district attorneys around the states, by our federal district attorney, by district attorneys around the states. Terrorists, domestic terrorists like BLM in 2020 are once again being rewarded. This has been called government media complex, where radical leftists in the government and the media cover up for crazies in the street. It's been called bio-Leninism. It's been called anarcho-tyranny, where essentially the radical left has crazies do their bidding. And that's what you noted yesterday long introduction today because I want the table to be set. I want people to understand what we're up against. Yesterday, there's a group called Jane's Revenge who released a literally full owning of domestic terrorism. I'll give you the DOJ's definition of domestic terrorism and you be the judge in a second. And I'm reading from LifeSite News. They're a militant pro-abortion group, Jane's Revenge is. And yesterday they declared fully openly an open season upon pro-lifers in this notice published actually late Tuesday. We promise to take increasingly drastic measures against oppressive infrastructures. Rest assured that we will, and those measures may not come in the form of something so easily cleaned up as fire and graffiti. Can you clean up fire? It doesn't. The language is so poorly drafted.
Dim.
What?
These broads are dim.
There's some dim broads. But even LifeSite's just calling them an extremist group here. To me, that's underwhelming. They advised that the 30-day ultimatum period during which Jane's Revenge demanded that pro-life groups disband had expired. So these are terrorists saying that pro-life groups and mothering centers for moms that want to have their babies rather than abort them, that these are acts of aggression. Let me just read their whole letter, actually. I wasn't originally going to read their entire letter, but let me do this. They said, this was only a warning. We demand the disbanding of all anti-choice establishments, fake clinics. Any clinic that doesn't murder fetuses is a fake clinic for them. And violent anti-choice groups to save the life of a baby is what they're constituting, what they're defining here as an anti-choice group who is violent. Within the next 30 days, this happened a month ago. This is not a mere difference of opinion as some have framed it. We are literally fighting for our lives. We will not sit still while we are killed and forced into servitude. We have run thin on patience and mercy for those who seek to strip us of what little autonomy we have left. It's clearly written by females. It's funny to say we're running thin on patience. As you continue to bomb clinics and assassinate doctors with impunity, I'm not sure they're the only ones bombing clinics. So too shall we adopt increasingly extreme tactics to maintain freedom of our own bodies. We are forced to adopt the minimum military requirement for a political struggle. These aren't your writers who did the writing here. Again, this was only a warning. Next time the infrastructure of the enslavers will not survive. Medical imperialism will not face a passive enemy. Wisconsin is the first flashpoint, but we are all over the U.S. and we will issue no further warnings. They're talking about a firebombing of a clinic in Wisconsin. One of the, according to Catholic Vote, 20 firebombings since of anti-abortion clinics since the release of the May 2nd draft opinion. Tim Poole says that 17 anti-abortion centers have been firebombed. Fox News said it was 16. This might just be chronological. These might be reported on different dates, or we might be calling different things firebombings. But the point is this. They made this threat 30 days ago. And now, I guess yesterday was the running of the full 30 days. And here's with equally community college savvy pros, they followed up with this. Another communique by Jane's Revenge. Sounds like a bunch of angry girls. I guess that's what it is. You have seen that we are real and that we are not merely pushing empty words. The choice of verbs is just the worst. Pushing doesn't even make sense there. As we said, we are not one group, but many. You have seen us in Madison, Wisconsin. They wrote the 30-day warning immediately after that. In Fort Collins, Colorado. In Reisterstown, Massachusetts, Olympia, Washington, Des Moines, Iowa, Linwood, Washington, Washington, D.C., Asheville, North Carolina, Buffalo, New York, Hollywood, Florida, Vancouver, Washington, Frederick, Massachusetts, Denton, Texas, Gresham, Oregon, Eugene, Oregon, Portland, Oregon, among others. And we work in countless locations invisibly. You've read the communiques from various cells. You've seen the proliferating messages in graffiti and elsewhere. Ooh, and you know that we are serious. Graffiti tells the reader that someone is serious, a serious interlocutor. What better than shitty scrawled writing on the back of a public restroom or something like that? Well, we know you're serious. We were unsurprised to see 30 days come and 30 days pass with no sign of consilience. I'm rather sure that's not a word. Or even bare minimum self-reflection from you who impersonate healthcare providers in order to harm the vulnerable. So by saving the lives of fetuses, consilience is actually a word. We have it on Good Word, but if you're a healthcare provider or a counseling center for moms who want to keep their babies, then this kooky group of dames here says that with no sign of consilience or bare minimum level of self-reflection, you're impersonating healthcare providers and you are harming the vulnerable by saving a baby's life. The vulnerable. By saving the vulnerable, you are harming them. Which reflects where we are as a country. Men have penises and can have babies, and women have penises. The former proposition is just true.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Oh boy. Well, it's so strange that it's getting me a little staggered, a little tongue-tied here, scrambled. And now they're saying that if you are one of the defenders of the vulnerable, you harm them. Jane's Revenge goes on with their erudite prose. History may not repeat itself, but it certainly rhymes. No clue what that means. And we've already seen such stanzas where medical autonomy is stripped away. That stanzas, a paragraph in poetry. That's just the wrong word. I'm certain, Jane. I mean, that doesn't make sense.
Jane is an idiot.
Humanity is increasingly criminalized, and merely surviving becomes largely untenable. None of that makes any sense. Your 30 days expired yesterday. They published this yesterday. We offered an honorable way out. You could have walked away. Now the leash is off. And we will make it as hard as possible for your campaign of oppression to continue. We have demonstrated in the past month how easy and fun it is to attack. So they're saying it's fun to do firebombings. This should not be an academic debate as to whether or not what they're doing counts as, sure, it may be amateur, sure, it may be almost risible because of communiques like this by a bunch of angry girls, but it still is domestic terrorism. Sure, still counts.
Can I just say something to women, these idiot women? Nobody in the history, especially men, can I just do a public service announcement? No man in the history of the universe has ever been afraid of a female at any time, at any place, ever. It's ridiculous. They're like trying to be tough, and it's laughable. They're women. Nobody cares. Like these threats are just hysterical.
But exactly. But they are doing real firebombings, and they're owning the real firebombings. I agree 100% with that point. No one's afraid, but it's sort of a win-win if you have a Department of Justice that's doing its job, which we don't. We haven't for several regimes. But if you had it, it would be kind of a win-win. This is not terrifying stuff. These aren't ISIS attacks. They're not, the kinds of shock and awe that we've seen out of the Middle East on planes, shopping malls, soft targets around the globe. That's genuinely frightening stuff. Beheadings, attacks with knives and things like that. This is kind of like, hey, look, these criminals can go away, should be going away to prison for a long time. They are openly owning these acts of domestic terrorism, but they're not all that scary. So it's kind of a win-win for the good guys if your Department of Justice is doing its job. If you live under a goodly regime. But since we live under a tyrannical regime, and really have for all of our lives, with weaponized intelligence agencies that run a psyop, like the hearing all week long on the J6th event, the J6th committee is running something not very far afield from the Soviet trumped up court hearings against enemies of Stalin. If you ask me the question, what the hell's up with America? From the perspective of naivete, where you're like, shouldn't our country be firing on all fours? No, it shouldn't. I'm not surprised. If you asked me in June of 2020, why are the villains being set free in all of America's most urbanized centers, and the people who defend their home with guns are literally being hauled before a criminal grand jury, at least, if it doesn't make it to trial, it's because we live under bio-Leninism. We live under anarcho-tyranny. This is what happens. It's happened all throughout human history. When a revolution should have happened sometime 50 to 100 years ago, and it did not. It did not. What happens then? When groups of people, this is a human generic reality, reality of the genus of human beings in polities, in civil society. Tyrants need to be reminded from time to time that the people can take arms, as Jefferson said. And when they don't, when the tree of liberty is not refreshed from time to time by the blood of patriots and tyrants, this is what you get. You get regimes, intelligence agencies that work against the good guys, that hate the Christians, that hate the patriots. They work hand in glove with escapees from mental institutions, like we saw with BLM, with those who want to destroy families, like BLM itself, with pedophiles, with the criminally insane. That's what we saw in the summer of 2020. They're being set free. They're being, to use the word from this Jane's Revenge letter, unleashed on the goodly citizens that the naive assume are the beneficiaries of the intelligence agencies. And yes, if you assume that, then you're naive. You don't understand. You can't read the signs of the times, as the New Testament says. If you think that any of this is like a trap sprung to ensnare our domestic enemies, a trap sprung to protect you and your family, then you're a fool. I hate to say. Well, we're 100 years due for a revolution. And Jefferson et al., all the revolutionaries, the men of 1776, said in rather precise terms, this would happen if every generation does not deem for itself whether or not a revolution is in order. Right? This is what Jefferson's Tree of Liberty speech was all about. Very famous, right? It has to be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. This is a generality. I'm not talking about anything in particular. We're 100 years overdue for it. The men of the 1700s were just harder, better citizens of republics, generally speaking, more serious Christians, broadly speaking, than the men of the 1800s. And the 1800s were better, broadly speaking, than the men of the 1900s. And we've just become soft and effete, and the tyrants know it. Right? They are not afraid of the people. When the government's afraid of the people, you have liberty. When the people are afraid of the government, you have tyranny. Another truism from 1776. So that's what's going on. And like Dark Knight Rises, it's like the only comic book movie I've ever seen and liked. We have bio-Leninism, where the crazies rove the streets. They're funded by the regime. They're enabled by the regime. They're emplaced in many cases by the regime. Groups like Jane's Revenge. They're enabled in all the most literal senses by the Biden administration, who will not, under Merrick Garland, prosecute these people, just like the George Soros plants in 16 or 18 of the most urbanized cities around the country in the summer of 2020. We're letting go murderers and arsonists all summer long. And they were hauling to jail and bringing before grand juries couples in the middle of the country who defended their very property with guns. So our 30 days expired yesterday. And look at the most devastating aspect of all this. I didn't read the entire thing. I can't take any more of the bad prose. But they've declared open season on pro-lifers. Here's some highlights. They're owning their illegal criminal threat, and they are not being punished. They've done 20 firebombings since May the 2nd, and they say expect more. More are coming. From here forward, any anti-choice group, any pro-life, anti-abortion group, who closes their doors and stops operating will no longer be a target. But until you do, it's open season. This is how the KKK was allowed to operate transactions in certain small parts of the South. They're doing this nationally and putting it on the internet and publishing it in major newspapers. Until you do, they say, it's open season and we know where your operations are. The infrastructure of the enslavers will not survive. This is literal domestic terrorism, said Greg Price, a digital strategist. He's pointing at this letter. And Biden's DOJ is allowing it to happen. What do you guys think about this? Are we ready to take more seriously the words of our 1776, our men of 76, our third president, who said, look, every generation is a generality, should seriously adjudicate, weigh, do we have liberty? Right? Ordered liberty, I mean. Liberty from the proper Thomistic perspective. The freedom to do the good. Do we have real liberty here? The freedom to outlaw abortion, which is the freedom to do good? No. Because our regime, our tyrannical, overarching federal despot in Washington, D.C., is working from the Department of Justice with terrorists in the street, Molotov cocktail throwing, firebombing terrorists who hate life and say any pro-life group will be bombed. They're working hand in hand in order to further strip us of our liberty. And bear in mind, the founders, the men of 1776, they started dumping tea into Massachusetts Bay and tarring and feathering the English lords and starting a revolution in late 1775 at Lexington and Concord because there was a small tax placed on their breakfast beverage. With no income tax, no abortion, no 14th Amendment, forcing drag queen story hour on your kids if you live in a blue state and you like the library. Nothing like that. No abortion, no forced contraception, no forced porn, none of that. But because they had a small tax placed on the breakfast beverage. That was their spark, the tinder flint, that set the whole thing in motion in 1776. What do you think they would say if we sheep live under this terror regime, this bio-Leninism, where criminally insane mental patients rove the streets with weapons essentially placed in their hands by the Department of Justice and the federal government. And they are literally doing acts of politically inspired domestic terrorism, and they are achieving their goal before our very eyes. If you don't think in these terms, then you're surprised. I know. I get it. I understand. If you don't think in these terms, then what I'm saying either sounds crazy or shocking, or it's a red pill at best. But if you already know, then you shouldn't. Then you should be here with me. What do we look? Something's got to happen. Something's got to happen. I don't know what. I don't know what has to happen here. But I'm reading from this Washington Examiner article whose title is Merrick Garland should investigate attacks on anti-abortion groups as domestic terrorism. And it, in the third paragraph, it defines domestic terrorism the way that the U.S. government does. And it shows very nicely that this comfortably situates these 20 fire bombings in the last month and a half as domestic terrorism. And yet, Merrick Garland and the Biden administration will not take action. So before I read to you the key parts of this article, I just want to say, well, what do we do? I don't have a specific solution in mind. I don't know. But there are terrorist groups that are running the streets and have actually, from the sense of outcome determination, they have achieved the goal they wanted. They first leaked on May the 2nd a draft opinion, and this is all corroborated. This is all a unified effort by the people who really run this country, the far, 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 far left, to stop 5 Supreme Court justices from overturning child murder. The forced legalization in all 50 states of child murder. And they're getting their way. May the 2nd, I came to you, I did a show. I said, you know what the ultimate response would be to the murderers and the murder lobby in this country, called the pro-abortion lobby? They leaked an opinion so that it would give them time to make threats against the justices, which they did against Kavanaugh. There was an attempted murder against Justice Kavanaugh. And there have been fire bombings of the anti-abortion pregnancy centers. And there have been all these acts of terrorism. And the court, the 5 justices on the court, I'm sorry to say, have been complicit, at least to the extent that they've been willing to procrastinate the publication of the decision. How does that sit with you? What I would have done on May the 3rd, Steph said this when it happened, release that shit. Release it now. It's this. Hey, you're going to threaten us? This is the American way. You're going to threaten us? Do your worst. Right? We normally release these draft opinion, these finalized publication. We publish the finalized opinions in June. We're going early May this year, baby. You're going to threaten us? We know what you're doing. You're going to send paid Soros protesters to our houses. You're going to publish where our kids go to school. You're going to publish where we attend church. You're going to, along with all the media, Democrat politician, and entertainment personalities, you're going to all but threaten, hey, we're going to hurt your kids. All right, well, this is what we've got for you. Roe versus Wade is overturned on May the 3rd. I know that's hoping for a lot. Aside from Alito and Justice Thomas, I don't think these folks sitting on the Supreme Court are our best and our brightest. And I don't think they're full of sand. And I'm not even sure they're full of brains. So I know that was asking for a lot. That's what I would have liked to see. That's what Steph would have liked to see. That's what most of you would have liked to see. A middle finger to the terrorists who think that they can run our country by the fiat law of bio-Leninist dictatorship. It's just, shock and awe, terror. The way things run in disordered regimes that operate on the principle that might is right, might makes right. If I threaten you, I get the outcome I want. And a lot of you I know, because we're all patriots in some sense. I'm a patriot. I fly, the original 13 stars and bars flag, the Betsy Ross flag. I have the appeal to heaven out in my front porch, for whatever that tells you. I love the Gadsden flag. I'm a patriot in that sense. 50-state union is, I think, Marxism at this point. But we're all patriots, and I know a lot of you are accustomed to saying things like, not in America, baby. Well, I'm here to tell you something else. It's done. 50-state union, this big, Masonic, Marxist, national Leviathan that has squelched the true Christianity, the true liberty of the truly Christian states, like those in the South where I live. That's what the United States 50-state union stands for. All right? And I know that I've been really unsubtle about this message in the shows since May and June. But I think a lot of you parish orphans and retrogrades out there need to have it spelled out for you, to be honest. If I'm being fully honest with you, you'd like to answer, not in America. That might fly in Soviet Russia. Well, it flies here. The justices, where the hell is the Dobbs decision? Everyone is watching them. Usually stuff like this happens, like Chief Justice Roberts something happened the last 48 hours before Obergefell was released in 2012. And he flipped his mind. But that was mostly private. This, what we're watching, is extremely psychologically interesting, because it's in full view. It's in full view. They made the threat. They published the opinion May the 2nd. And now the politicians, the leftists in Congress, in the Senate, people like Samantha Bee, actors and actresses who are crazy, kooky, radical left, professors, and journalists are all threatening them. And they're like, look, we have the muscle in the streets. And we have the muscle in the AG. And we have the muscle in the DOJ. And what we're going to let these bullies set your homes on fire like they did 2 summers ago. And we're going to bring you to jail for defending your home with a gun or something until we get the political result that we want. So don't tell me not in America. Don't tell me that. More than 100 House Republicans are, this is good, calling on Attorney General Merrick Garland to investigate the rash of attacks and vandalism targeting anti-abortion groups as acts of domestic terrorism. They mean, this was written yesterday, June 15th. They meant in the previous month and a half exactly since May the 2nd. The letter was signed by at least 124 House Republicans and was co-authored by Representatives Scott Franklin of Florida, Claudia Tenney of New York, and Mike Johnson of Louisiana. We write to express serious concerns over recent attacks targeting religious organizations and crisis pregnancy centers, and request the Department of Justice respond with how its National Security Division plans to investigate these acts of domestic terrorism, the Republicans said. Since the draft Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health U.S. Supreme Court opinion was leaked on May the 2nd, 2022, U.S. Supreme Court justices and pro-life advocates have experienced heightened threats and violence. The DOJ unveiled a new domestic terrorism unit in January during a hearing on the Capitol riot, which is going on again this week. It wasn't a riot. And the FBI has said it considers the riot domestic terrorism. We live in Soviet Russia. That's terrorism? Few goofballs running around without their shirts? No weapons? Some of them are killed for no reason. They should have gotten maybe $100 fine. And that's terrorism. But groups trying to kill Supreme Court justices to secure a certain Supreme Court verdict. And firebombing scores of businesses and owning it publicly. They're not even hauled before a jury. That's not terrorism. The Republicans pointed to 18 U.S. Code Section 2331, which defines domestic terrorism as, get this, activities that involve acts dangerous to human life, that are a violation of the criminal laws, intending to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion or through threats of violence. Let me repeat that. The Republicans are pointing to this rightly, and they're having to beg and plead with Merrick Garland to enforce the laws. 18 U.S. Code Section 2331 defines domestic terrorism as activities that involve acts dangerous to human life, like firebombing someone's home or business, that are a violation of the criminal laws, intending to influence the policy of a government by, what they're saying they're doing. They're like, Jane's Revenge is we're trying to influence the policy of a government. We want an anti-Roe decision to come out pro-Roe by intimidation or coercion or threats of violence. Now, I could go through line by line with these letters being circulated by Ruth's, whatever they're called. Ruth Sent Us or Jane's Revenge. But it's not necessary. This syncs up so laterally. It's such a perfect match, linearly. The House members argued the DOJ has a clear duty to pursue these recent attacks as instances of domestic terrorism, and it is the responsibility of the National Security Division to protect the United States from threats to our national security by seeking justice through law. The letter argued that terrorists have targeted numerous pro-life crisis pregnancy centers, two of which culminated in the firebombing and destruction of property by the terrorist groups Jane's Revenge in Buffalo, New York, and Madison, Wisconsin. They've done more since then. The Republicans noted that during the Madison attack, the words, "If abortions aren't safe, then neither are you." That makes the whole case that this is political violence oriented at a political end, outcome determinative end. They were spray painted on the building's facade. I saw this a few days after February the 2nd. Compass Care, the group targeted in Buffalo, described the effort against it as abortion terrorism. Planned Parenthood told the outlet that we condemn violence and hatred in all forms. I don't know what to say. I just don't know what to say anymore. Because, I don't know, I was listening to Tim Poole on it, who's sort of center-right, I guess. Tim Poole he's still, I like him. He's a likable guy. Usually agree with him these days. He bothers to distinguish between pro-choice and pro-abortion. He said these are not pro-choice groups, these are pro-abortion groups. And he made the distinction based on the fact that, hey, as long as you respect the pro-life counseling centers, then do your thing. And he also asserted wrongly that you can't procure an abortion under the current abortion jurisprudence beyond certain gestation age. That's just wrong. You can get an abortion ever since Roe and Doe, a case decided on the same day. You can get an abortion up to 9 months gestation. In places like Illinois, you could get an abortion. You could basically kill the baby after it was born, because Obama got his way on that in 2006 and 2008. So you can kill a little baby up through its birth and in certain states after it's born. So I don't understand why center-right guys like Tim Poole continue to distinguish between pro-choice and pro-abortion. But the point is, he's saying otherwise sensible things. He's like, look, these are crazy murderers. He misses that point but gets the rest. And I don't know, you got Fox News reporting Justice Kavanaugh's neighbors are describing horrific experience being part of the neighborhood and dealing with aggressive pro-life protesters. They're saying, look, these people are being shipped in. They're Soros funded. They're threatening the lives of the justices' wives and kids, and threatening to kill them at church with a wink and a nod, threatening to kill the kids at school with a wink and a nod. And Merrick Garland will not do anything. More than 100 House Republicans have called on him to do something. He's not going to do something. This is a tyrannical murder regime based on abortion, based on child sacrifice, based on taking away our liberties, supplanting them with license, meaning you don't have the freedom you need to do the good. You have the freedom needed to do wickedness. One has been replaced by the other. And they will not let Roe versus Wade be overturned. So I don't know what's going to happen. How many times have I sat up here in front of you guys and said, I don't know what the hell's going to happen. I don't know how this is going to turn out. They're petrified, the 5 justices that, like Kavanaugh, who's had an attempt on his life. They were going to overturn Roe versus Wade. Are they going to now? I literally don't know. It's crazy. And it's like watching it all happen, like we can see through the curtain. Normally this stuff in this corrupt, fallen country, we don't get to see the stuff happening behind the curtain. Now we are, and no one knows what's going to happen. Where is the Dobbs decision? Where is it? You guys made it worse for yourself. You 5, quote unquote, conservative justices that were going to overturn Roe versus Wade by ruling, as Alito's opinion implied it was going to rule, in the Dobbs decision. You made it worse for yourself by not releasing the opinion the next day, because then you allowed them time to mobilize and organize. Now, a month and a half later, you're like, they're really mobile. They're ready. They have bricks laying in cities around the country. They're going to set the country on fire if you release that opinion, that the draft opinion all but expressly said you're going to release. Now these 5 guys could hide behind, we don't want to be responsible for acts of domestic terrorism. What do we do? Well, you shouldn't have waited 7 weeks. You should have released it right then. Now, of course, the right thing to do is still overturn Roe versus Wade. But the country is going to be engulfed in flames this summer, as it was 2 summers ago, by BLM. And that's because we've got a bigger problem. That's because we're 100 years past, 150 years, whatever it is, past the people needing. When you have liberty, it means the government's afraid of the people. When you have tyranny, it means the people are afraid of the government. We've lived under this since at least the end of the Civil War, this tyrannical, nationalist, Leviathan regime of 14th Amendment, anti-subsidiarity, where they force porn and sodomy and contraception and abortion and murder and anti-Christianity on us. So what do we do at this point? What you can do, in all seriousness, the one thing I know you can do is get yourself and your family to a red state at whatever cost. Literally at whatever cost. Besides human sacrifice, not that. Anything else. Take a shittier job. Take a lower paying job. Work from home if you can. Quit your job. You can get a nicer house here, by the way, because it's a cheaper part of the country than where you're coming from if you live in basically any blue state. Quit your job. Move here. Sort it out afterwards. Get to a red state if you're a conservative or any kind of Christian. And get to one in the blood red swath of states from Texas to Florida. It is a lovely way of life. And then we can really start having conventions of the southern states, what to do next. Because this will not avail. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. What we have is anarcho-tyranny, where the big regime works with crazies across all the states. It directs things from the national level, from the cesspool on the Potomac, Washington, D.C. They're going to prosecute the good guys, let the bad guys walk, put weapons in the hands of the bad guys, prevent the prevention of child murder, because these are Luciferians at the very top. At the very top, these elites are Luciferians that will not let their anti-sacrament of child sacrifice, pedophilia, child rape and murder, in other words, they won't let it go. And abortion is holy to them. And they're wicked. And there's no warrant for distinctions between pro-choice and pro-abortion. Just as I say, don't even distinguish between anti-abortion and and pro-life. Just call it anti-abortion. I guess I'm distinguishing between anti-abortion and pro-life. But there's no meaningful distinction between pro-choice and pro-abortion the way Tim Poole did. People are going to have to get smart fast. Abortion is a much bigger deal. I always thought it was a big deal. You're killing a little baby, the most innocent. That's what's really at stake here. But for those of you who are slow studies and you're iffy, you're centrist on abortion, where you're distinguishing between pro-choice and pro-abortion, Tim Poole seems like a very good dude. I don't understand why he's slow study on what abortion really is. It goes even deeper than just child murder. There's the spiritual component to it. There's the Luciferian component to it. And there is no way that they are going to walk away from this one. So think of what's going to happen next. And by the way, final thought of the day. When they release this opinion, when they release Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, it's got to be sometime in June. They are waiting till the last second, like Michael Scott on an undeliverable promise. They don't know what they're going to do, but he's going to wait till the last minute of the day because he's a coward. There's going to be hell to pay. That's just, I'm not making the threat, but I just read you 2 pages of threats from these groups. These pro-abortion groups. There's going to be hell to pay. What difference does it make if it's June 1st or June 30th? And it's going to dominate the news cycle for the rest of the summer, I think. Like BLM in summer of 2020. I have a book coming out in late summer, you know. I have particular considerations to get to. Everything's going to be swallowed up by what follows. The storm of the release of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health. Where the hell is this opinion? Get it out there. Let's get on with it. It will be, I think, civil war. I don't think that's the worst thing. Far from it. This country's divided. A house divided against itself can't stand. There's no way that anybody's going to budge on this. The whole thing needs to come out. It needs to come out in the wash now. And the blue states and the red states are not going to get along. We are not going, there is no compromise or negotiation that can be made here. This had its makings at the end of the Civil War. There is a fundamental difference between the pro-union Northern Yankees, like those in Lincoln's administration, all of whom were reading Marx, that are liberal Northerners that always liked Marx. Then 70 years later, they liked Delinsky. The Northerners, the communists, the ones like Alger Hiss that wanted to be in the United Nations. The Luciferians in the northerly parts of this country. There's a fundamental disconnect with the Christians who live in my part of the country in the South. It's a fundamentally different way of life envisioned. It's a fundamentally different economy envisioned. It's a fundamentally different res publica that binds the civil society envisioned by the North and the South. So this is downstream of what happened in the Civil War, wrong outcome. And 10 years ago, even conservatives, but normies of all stripes would mock me for saying so, and did, because I've published on this before. But now it's a lot more clear. They either have to live with what they think is unconscionable, they're Satanists more or less, the idea of getting rid of child murder, or we have to live with the unconscionable. Break the whole thing up. I don't know how that happens, right? Do it peaceably, if possible. But we are reaping the whirlwind, just like Chuck Schumer threatened 2 Supreme Court justices on national television. He said, if you get rid of Roe versus Wade, you will reap the whirlwind. Well, now we're reaping the pre-whirlwind. We're pre-gaming for the storm that can no longer be avoided. A storm cannot be avoided when a republic, a res publica, which is supposed to have one thing in common, Christianity, res publica, one thing. When it has there are 2 republics within this failed republic. One is Christianity, the city of God, and one is Satanism, the city of man. Like St. Augustine wrote 1,600 years ago. One is Christianity, the sacraments, even the Protestants have baptism, right? And even the Protestants know that the anti-sacrament of abortion is wicked. At least restoring that much Christianity to public life. That's the res publica of people, good-hearted, good-willed Americans, particularly in the South. And on the other end, the communists who want total control from Washington, D.C., did since Lincoln's administration. They were reading Marx. They loved Marx. They know that big government is best done by big expanses of land like the Soviet Union. They want federal control from D.C., and they want federal control such that your kids can be forced to watch drag shows. They can be forced to see condoms put on cucumbers in their public schooling. This is all real stuff. They can be forced. States can be forced. Illegal to be illegal. Forced into contraception, sodomy, gay marriage, pornography. Your kids can be ensnared, particularly your boys, can be ensnared into the trap of pornography that they get through their phones starting when they're 8 years old. It is an addiction, and what they're trying to do in this mass psyop, you know what their agency is, it's Lucifer, is to ensnare everyone into the mental dysphoria, the spiritual craziness of what's today called leftism, the radical left. And that's what bio-Leninism is. They're driving everyone a little bit crazy, or a lot crazy, by driving Christianity out of our lives. And then, once we're drones that are porn-addled, spiritually impoverished, obsessed, or in some cases, I think a lot of these people are possessed. They're controlling people's minds with the media. Then they can have total control, and then they can do their globalist thing. But before you can have globalism, you need one big government nationalism. You have to do away with the Catholic teaching on subsidiarity. So they want sea to shining sea, continent-wide nationalism. Addle everybody's brains with porn and contraception and trans and their grooming, their pedo-groomers and their pedo-Satanists doing their thing. Then once everyone is lulled to sleep, they have a more sure, more fast control, then those elites will do their globalist thing. That's what Agenda 2030 is all about. But they didn't anticipate this pushback from some corners of this country, all of which, I would say the most meaningful of which, come from the American South, as they always have. We have to gather ourselves here. That's all I know to do, because it's not illegal to leave your state. It's not called yet an act of war to leave California and New York to go to Texas, or to go to Florida, or to go to Mississippi or Alabama. So do that. And pray and fast fervently that these Supreme Court justices don't alter the draft of Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health, and that they release it today. And don't even bother to pray. Don't even bother. Merrick Garland is an agent of evil. Pray for his soul, but don't even waste your time praying that Biden's administration is going to come correct. I mean, always do it. But pray for other things. There's a lot we have to do. There's a lot yet we have left to do. And it's in another direction. Be realistic. God love you. Deus Volt. God save us.